Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, the area that is within this red border is the Appalachian region. And then the counties that are highlighted in green there, they were the initial counties that were considered coal communities. Next slide, please. So a little history back here at EPA in March of 2021, my office, the Office of Communities, Tribes and Environmental Assessment, met with representatives from regions 4 and 5 because the Appalachian Regional Commission, the counties within that commission span across regions 3, 4, and 5. And we wrote and submitted a proposal to our headquarters office, the Office of Environmental Justice, to see if we couldn't get some funding, ARP funding, so that we could then start a collaboration with the Appalachian Regional Commission. In September, we were awarded $500,000, and in September of 2021, we met with Gail Manchin to talk about our ideas, and she then had us start working with Bettina and some of her colleagues on a community capacity building project. In November of 2021, we entered into an agency agreement with ARC, and that was provided the $500,000 towards the Ready Appalachia, a community capacity building initiative. Next slide, please. Bettina, you want to talk a little bit now about ARC?
Yeah, thanks, Betty. Just to jump in here real quick, just for one slide, and then you'll see me again later. So hi, everybody. My name is Bettina Jones from the Appalachian Regional Commission. Just real quick to jump on what Betty said. So you can see the map that she also showed a second ago on the right-hand side of the Appalachian region. This is our service territory, and we are an economic development agency. We're a partnership of the federal government and the 13 state governments that you see here within the Appalachian region. It's kind of a unique regional partnership. But we provide federal grants to nonprofits and local governments and others within the Appalachian region. And our overall mission is to strengthen economic growth and community capacity in Appalachia. So I'll kick it back over to Betty now that you have that introduction of us.
Thank you, Bettina. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to talk about the goals of it. So the overall goal of the collaboration was to reinvigorate EPA's relationship with ARC, to do outreach to coal communities in regions 3, 4, and 5, and then to partner with ARC to implement that Ready Appalachia Community Capacity Building Initiative. Next slide, please. So the goals of the Capacity Building Initiative was to identify challenges to economic recovery in coal communities, offer a combination of training and grants to better inform Appalachian local governments, their local development districts, and nonprofit organizations about available funding for revitalization purposes, and to provide assistance to those local governments, LDDs, and nonprofits. Next slide, please. So the EPA ARC capacity building, it's 2 phases. The first phase was pretty much, it was more like training. The phase 1 of the initiative included 5 2-part virtual trainings. And they also created a virtual hub for communities and local development districts to share best practices. 2 of the 5 sessions included training to the participants about the ARP funding, you could use that funding for, as well as the reporting requirements. There were 2 additional sessions where we had community leaders come on and talk about their revitalization efforts. And we picked the topics based on what we heard from the participants as some of their challenges. So we had a couple of folks come on and talk about how, for instance, there was a representative from North Carolina who came on and talked about how they applied for grant money, how they were able to break money and to start rebuilding their economy through outdoor recreation, because that was what was their greatest asset. So next slide, please. So some of the results here, we have more than 600 county, local, and district officials participate. 408 of those 423 counties were from across Appalachia. 82 of the participants were from the coal communities, and 67 of the 74 local development districts serving Appalachia also participated. Next slide, please. Throughout the training, we continued to survey the participants to try to figure out what the real challenges were. And so what we heard from the training participants was that applying for and managing grant funding was a huge problem. Bettina's going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Lack of matching funds for many federal grant opportunities, wastewater infrastructure, broadband, job training needs to attract business, and lack of housing opportunity. Next slide, please. I'm now going to turn it over to Bettina so she can talk about phase 2 of this project.
Yeah, thank you, Betty. So to talk about this Ready Appalachia that we've mentioned a couple of times, Betty really laid out the history, the context really well. We at ARC have done a couple of things related to capacity building. We have worked in that sphere kind of ad hoc on and off, doing different types of initiatives over the years, but it really came to a head immediately following COVID. And so we developed after COVID, later on in 2020, something called the Appalachian Nonprofit Resource Center. And that was really designed to try to help nonprofits remain solvent and continue to offer services to constituents and clients, including health nonprofits, arts nonprofits, small business development type of nonprofits, all throughout the Appalachian region that became so critical during the pandemic. And we developed that, and that would become what is now Ready Nonprofits, which I'll talk about in a second. Then could you go to the previous slide, please? So just to talk about Betty's, what she mentioned, the capacity building pilot program, that of course, as she mentioned, was training for local development districts and local elected officials, like a kind of small scale, not exactly small, but like small by comparison to Ready Appalachia, more like a pilot of what we would then do. And then another reason for us developing Ready Appalachia was, of course, as Betty mentioned, this increase in federal funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, now the CHIPS Act, and of course, ARP funding. And in addition to responding to increased federal funding, we also saw this as an opportunity to kind of get at long-term capacity development issues that Appalachia experiences. So our target groups for Ready Appalachia across all the programs, which I'll mention in a second, are underserved communities. And we take a broad definition for that, but included in that are low-income communities, interagency working group on coal and power plant communities, historically marginalized populations, low capacity entities, previously unreached individuals and groups. And some of these are going to cross-cut, like they're going to be more than one of those types. And so really aiming at those types of communities. Next slide, please. So actually, what is the initiative Ready Appalachia? So like I said, it's new. It builds on the pilot program, kind of a ramped up version of the pilot program and the Appalachian Nonprofit Resource Center, everything that kind of led to it. The program serves what we like to call 4 different pillars of economic development in Appalachia. So that's nonprofit organizations, local governments, community foundations, and local development districts. The program across all those 4 different types provides small group virtual training specific to each type of organization and follows that up with match-free grant funding for a capacity related issue for each of those entities, that only those who finish the training are able to apply for. Next slide, please. So to kind of give you a flavor of what this actually looks like on the ground, I'll talk about Ready Nonprofits, which, as I mentioned, is the kind of heir to the Appalachian Nonprofit Resource Center, which we've been doing for a couple of years now. We just put it under the broader Ready program. It became kind of absorbed into the Ready program. So we offer small group virtual courses in board development, fundraising, financial management, programs and operations, human capital, and marketing communications. We've done this now for about 3 years. We've done several iterations. We've added courses and subtracted courses and changed things around based on feedback we've received from participants. We've served over 200 nonprofits through this. And what we do is they take a class. It lasts 10 weeks long. There are one-on-ones with the instructor and the organization. There is homework. There are follow-up consultations. They really deep dive into the subject matter. So next slide, please. So following the training program, when the organizations finish with that, they are then able to apply for a grant program that only alumni can apply for. They can apply for up to $25,000 with no match required. The project must address their organization's capacity building. So it's not a traditional kind of externally focused project with beneficiaries and those sorts of things. It needs to be about the organization's capacity. So it could be hiring somebody, it could be buying equipment that the nonprofit needs, it could be contracting for a strategic plan, it could be hiring a part-time grant writer. There are lots of different possibilities for this. We've had one nonprofit want to pay for the benefits of their employees to make them a more attractive employer, for example. So we actually help the nonprofit develop their capacity development project idea, which doesn't mean they have to do what we say, but we just, if they're at a loss, like, hey, I'm not sure what will advance my capacity, we offer technical assistance for them to arrive at that idea. The program isn't competitive. They're not all competing for one grant or a pot of grants. We have enough money for everybody to be funded at the full amount. And the grant does not have to relate to their course either. We recognize that sometimes the capacity need and the training need are different. And so it can relate to their course, but it doesn't have to. Next slide, please. So this basic program model of training and then grant will be followed for local development districts. As we talked about in the pilot phase, we did the training program for local development districts together with EPA. And for local governments, we actually are in the middle of launching that program right now, which will focus specifically on applying for and managing federal grants and community foundations. And so Betty was talking all about the Ready LDDs program, which I can mention now. So that's the program specifically that ARC and EPA are working together on. So what we are doing is ARC is investing $4 million together with a portion of the $500,000 that Betty mentioned that EPA provided generously to the capacity building work. And so what that is for is to allow LDDs to hire whether staff or contractors to help local governments and nonprofits access federal money. We really in the Appalachian region rely heavily on the LDDs. And as we were talking about all this federal money flowing in, local governments and nonprofits really rely on the LDDs to help them access federal money. And so the LDDs were really strapped for people. They really needed people to be able to support communities. And so what ARC and EPA are doing are trying to offer funds for those people to be hired. So they will work with Appalachian communities to write grant proposals, manage funding once it's approved, and do the grant reporting that is so important and communities need support with. So to date, we have received 39 applications, and we actually announced 5 of them in Kentucky last week. The area development districts received $500,000 from us, which was really exciting to announce. And the others we are now reviewing and ranking. So I think that is everything from my part. Happy to answer questions at the end. I believe I'm now turning it over to Heidi Binko from Just Transition Fund. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was just, the slide was just, if you would like more information here, you can sign up for ARC's weekly newsletter. I realize you can't click on this, but I think this will be distributed to you by email. And then we also have our own website for Ready. Sorry, Heidi, I'm turning it over to you now.
Bettina, no worries. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Heidi Binko, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Just Transition Fund. I'm going to put a few links to our services in the chat now, just because I can't do 2 things at once. So the links will be in reference to our Federal Access Center, which I'll talk about, but please go ahead and click through. Next slide, please. Great. Okay. So I recognize that probably many of you, some of you don't know or aren't familiar with the Just Transition Fund. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of background. I created the Just Transition Fund in 2015 with my partner at the time. And we worked very closely and created the fund directly as a response to President Obama's Power Initiative, which was the first time that federal funding was ever made available to help coal communities in transition, right? And so we, at the time, had been looking around the country, and we're seeing a lot of economic distress happening in places where both coal plants and coal mines close. I think many of you understand, what's happening there, but it's the loss of direct jobs, indirect jobs, the loss of the tax base, right? And it just leads to a whole host of economic challenges for these communities. And so we felt at the JTF like it was going to be very important for philanthropy to try to make sure that these communities could create and create a vibrant economic local economy for their futures and their families. And so that was the start of the JTF. Very simply, if you think about what we do at the Just Transition Fund, you can think about it in terms of a whole bucket of work dedicated toward access, advocating, and then convening, right? So our Federal Access Center is what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today. And I think it's just a great complement to the work that both Betty and Bettina talked about. We actually have been doing this work since 2015, but as you all know, now with the Biden administration, there is just so much more federal funding available that we have even more resources, and we're ramping up our efforts. So first thing we do is help communities access federal funds specifically for community economic development, workforce development, and infrastructure. And I'll talk a little bit more later about why those three things. The second thing that we do is we advocate. So we feel very strongly that the people that are most affected by this problem, and so I'm talking about local economic and workforce development experts in coal communities, should be informing both state and federal policy solutions. And so I'd just like to draw your attention to our National Economic Transition Initiative, which we actually launched in the very beginning, late 2018, very beginning 2019. And what we did there was we pulled together coal community leaders from all around the country to come together and articulate what was needed with a robust federal transition program. And that platform was released in June of 2020. You can look that up online. I'll drop a link later in the chat for those of you that are interested. And I'm happy to say that many of our requests, including the creation of a body like the IWG and funding for coal communities, have been met through the climate executive order that Betty referenced, and then through ARPA infrastructure, and then IRA after that. The last thing we do is we convene. We have an annual convening, and what we like to do is bring together like-minded leaders from different parts of the country so that they can more quickly learn from each other. There's really not a lot of time to address the issues of climate change and economic distress too once a closure happens. So we were, I'm always struck by, I'll always remember one thing that a friend of mine who runs a CDFI told me, and she said that the best gift that we can get is to find out what works in other places and then replicate it in our place, so we're not, reinventing the wheel and trying things. And that spread of ideas is what we're trying to do with our convenings. Next slide, please. Great. Just very quickly, we actually will take applications from any coal community around the country. There are 372 counties right now that are affected by the closure of coal plants and coal mines. And the way that we target our resources is we undertook a data-driven analysis when we started this work, and we identified the communities that had experienced the most economic distress and had the highest populations of marginalized people, and we go there first. Again, we'll accept applications from any place, but we're really focusing on those that are hardest hit, that have suffered from persistent poverty for the longest. And this is just a visual that will show you some of the places where we've done our deepest work. Next slide, please. So our Federal Access Center, before I talk about what it is, both Betty and Bettina referenced this. We know from almost a decade working on these issues that communities face significant barriers to accessing federal funds, right? Just because the money is there doesn't mean communities can access it. If you're working on rural economic development, which most coal communities are, because the coal communities that are hit the hardest are often, not all the time, but are often in rural areas. So if you are a community member working on this problem, you have to navigate over 400 different programs that are spread across more than 10 different agencies. All of these programs have different eligibility requirements. They have different application processes. It's maddening. So at the JTF, we actually have navigators who will help you figure out which program is the best for you. So navigating that complicated process is really tough, right? Especially for a low capacity organization or community. Stringent eligibility and match requirements. We hear over and over and over again that communities simply don't have the match available. That's something that we can do and we can provide and help. And then also the other thing that we hear most often is that the application processes are often so complex and the timing is such, you know, the NOFO or the federal funding opportunity comes out and you have a really short period of time to respond. You need a professional grant writer oftentimes to be able to get it done in the period. Our grant funds can be used for that. Next slide, please. So that's essentially what the Federal Access Center is, right? So we are helping communities that are at two stages, both at the application ready in the early stage, apply for federal funds for community economic development and diversification, workforce development, and infrastructure, notably broadband. When I say communities, the people that are eligible for our grants include both community-based nonprofits and local governments. So if you have a project and you need help, we're really hoping that you reach out. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but I just want to point to some of our successes. We were so excited about the Big Act Now coalition that received a $63 million Build Back Better grant. There were several of our long-term grantees that were a part of that, including Generation West Virginia, the West Virginia Community Economic Development Hub, Coalfield Development, Highlands, and a few others. All of those groups we have been supporting throughout the years to build their capacity. And for this particular grant, we help them provide funding to convene and come together and work on the problem and work on the application. And we also then provided them matching funds. And again, I think that from what we've heard from them, that was really key and helpful to getting that grant. Next slide, please. This slide, again, I won't spend too much time but for those federal agencies that are on the call, I just wanted to flag that we're working very closely with the IWG rapid response teams in the regions that they have launched programs. We were just actually in Kentucky last week working on what's happening there. Next slide, please. And then again, just to sort of tell you a little bit more in a little bit more detail about the services that we offer, you can think about the work at the FAC in sort of three parts. The first two are community focused. So again, we offer help to community groups who are application ready. This means people that are ready to go, right? They've got a project idea, they know which fund they want to, or which federal program that they want to apply to. We provide grants of up to $100,000 that can be used for match to hire grant writers to address all those barriers I talked about in the beginning. We also provide technical assistance. We've got experts both internally and through consultants that we work with that know these agencies inside and out, and we offer one-on-one application reviews to help you submit competitive applications, right? The second piece of our work, which I'm really excited about, and again, I dropped both a link to the application ready grants and a link to the early stage support grants. We just launched this a couple of weeks ago, but we have launched our Coal Communities Get Ready Challenge. What we'll be doing over the next couple of months is selecting a cohort of between 8 to 10 organizations. They are groups that have probably not much, if any, experience applying for federal funds, but we want to try to build that pipeline and get people like for next year ready, right? So we're looking for groups that want that additional help. For this project, we'll be, or for this program, we'll be supplying them with grants up to $150,000 and also deep technical assistance to get ready. So we're super excited about that. If you know anybody that you think is eligible, please have them fill out the forms I sent in the chat it's really like a 10-second process. And then the last part of the FAC is just working with federal agencies. We want to take all the great lessons and needs that we hear from the field and share them with EPA, ARC, and others. Next slide, please. So this is just, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but the first step either for application ready or early stage is submit the inquiry. The link is in the chat. Next slide, please. Yep, same thing with early stage. So our process is that you submit the inquiry, we hold a screening call, and then we go from there. I should say one last bit of information. The application ready grants are rolling, so we'll do those all year round, and they're really designed to be rapid response. So we typically give community groups, once you apply, it's a 3-week turnaround time, right? So it's pretty fast. The early stage, the inquiry is due May 31st, so the deadline is coming up. The applications, if you're invited to apply, will be due by June 30th. And then we'll be announcing the cohort probably sometime in late August. Next slide, please. We support organizations working across all of the agencies that have major programs that are helping coal communities. And of course, the work that Bettina is doing at ARC and ARC's Great Arise and Power program are ones that we've helped to support. And of course, there's a number at EPA and EDA and DOE. I think the big programs this year are going to be some of the broadband programs, and then the recompete, the tech hubs at EDA, and then some of the really cool new programs at both USDA and DOE. Next slide, please. Just a note about our impact to date, and I think this number has gone up a little bit, 393 million leveraged. We're generating 157x return on our investment for our donors. And, we're really excited about this because, as we've been talking about today, now is the time. There's this historic level of investment ready. And, we know that all our partners at the federal agencies want to make sure that communities can get these funds, but it's tough. And so the JTF is really here to help. And with a lot of different needs. Next slide, please. Last, really quick, here's a QR code. Links are in the chat. And why work with us? Maybe just a few things to think about, right? There's that network coordination and convening. It's an opportunity to meet peers from all over the country. The services that we provide really are focused again on direct grants and technical assistance. And then we are operating as that really critical liaison between federal agencies and communities. And we found that a lot of communities, particularly those who have not had a lot of experience in accessing federal funds, find that really, really valuable. So I think with that, I'll conclude and turn it over for questions. And just again, want to say thank you for having me this afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Betty, Bettina, and Heidi, so much for those amazing presentations. As Heidi said, we have some time for Q&A. I don't see anything put in the chat, so if you have a question you'd like answered, feel free to just unmute yourself as well, or if you'd like to put it in the chat, either option is fine.
Are you all working with communities who may be interested in the new EPA CPRG planning grants?
So I want to speak to that. This is Betty Barnes from EPA. I don't know that these grants have been offered yet. It's my understanding that the agency is still collecting information about the types of projects that we're going to be funding. So I think most people may be on hold waiting to hear more from EPA about the grants, when they're going to open, and the types of projects that they're going to be funding.
I should say that once the program opens, and there's a few federal programs that are like that, we're waiting for more information. Anything that, we're talking today here about, we've referenced environmental justice, but anything that crosses or intersects economic opportunity with environmental justice is sort of in our sweet spot. So if you're a community that is going after a federal program that's looking at inclusive economic growth, that's absolutely something that would fit with our priority focus.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think so. Within Ready Appalachia, we are in the process of standing up a program focused specifically on local government, mayors, executives, city managers, elected officials, teaching them how to apply for and manage federal grants, just the kinds of things that are the same across all federal grants. There are some things that are, similar across, there's some commonalities there, and teaching those essential skills. And I think that in a way aligns with what you were talking about. They could be interested in this potential EPA program. I'm sure some of them might be, but the point is for them to actually be able to access that, to be able to read and understand the NOFO, to be able to fill out the forms correctly, and those sorts of things. So in that sense, yes. Yeah.
Great, thank you all. We had a question from Rebecca. What has been the response thus far from coal communities in West Virginia? Are they interested? Do you feel like your outreach is reaching them?
This is Betty from EPA. I think some of the coal communities, they're rural communities, and that was one of the big focuses of the combined collaboration with EPA and ARC, was to reach those communities, to let them know what's going on, that there is help out there, and to really figure out what their biggest challenges were. And one of the biggest challenges was this whole issue of grants, writing the grants, being able to apply, because some federal grants could be so complicated. The other thing too is the interagency work group for coal communities has been very active throughout the country, and they formed these rapid response teams, and they've been going around the country. Heidi alluded to one that took place last week in Kentucky, and what they typically have roundtable discussions for community leaders to come to talk about what their challenges are, and then there are representatives, high-level representatives from the sister federal agencies that are part of this interagency work group, to be able to talk to the communities to say, these are the different types of resources that we have available, whether it's a grant, technical assistance, or it could be, for instance, in an EPA program. One of the biggest influx of money came in from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and it had to do with, for EPA, it's wastewater treatment. So wastewater treatment infrastructure. So that would be our federal agencies talking to the communities, giving them contact information, people here at EPA, if this is an issue for you, whether it's upgrading or actually putting in a wastewater treatment system, this is who you need to contact. So it's a variety of different things, and these rapid response teams, when they go around the country and they have these open forums, this is the way that we're getting the word out and also learning more and more about the challenges.
Just to jump in here, I think it's really interesting, speaking from the perspective of a national fund. So, like I said, we've been doing this work since we launched in 2015, but our Federal Access Center, we launched that in early 2020, in 2021 sometime, the first quarter. It's really just an expanded version of, what we've been doing for years. And since we launched the fund, we've received, I think it's almost 300 different 300 inquiries from communities in over 30 different states. And it's West Virginia has been either one or two in terms of the demand that we see from the field almost that entire time. I think maybe Kentucky might have beat them out shortly for a while, but then they kind of went up the next week. So just to answer the question in the chat about how West Virginia communities are responding, we're seeing a lot of demand from the state.
One thing I'll add to that, yeah, totally agree with what Heidi said, that West Virginia is kind of going full swing with applications. We always consistently get a lot of applications for all of our programs from West Virginia at the kind of the broad ARC level. I also think when it comes to your question about how communities are responding to this, I think with all the funding and different programs and offerings that are now available, and rapid response teams that are taking place, I get the sense that people are now interested in West Virginia and other parts of Appalachia and rural America like they have not been. And I don't know if folks are used to this level of not only attention, but offering and availability and it is kind of overwhelming. I mean, that's the sense that I get when I talk to folks from the region, which is why, all three of us, our programs exist, is to kind of respond to that overwhelm and to try to make folks help them, bridge these barriers, I think, because that overwhelm can shut some people down. So I think it's listening to folks about what they actually need in terms of their capacity, and not just what we at kind of the national or regional level think that they need, but it's surveying them constantly and asking them what we can change. I know with Ready, we're always doing that and we're always listening. So I think it's what we're hearing is a lot of overwhelm, a lot of thanks as well, but kind of like surprise as well that there's so much attention on them now. So it's very interesting.
Bettina, I couldn't agree more. And I would just add to that. I think that what people are really feeling too is just overwhelmed. I agree. And a little bit stressed and worried. I mean, the pace of this is really, really, really fast for some of these communities. And I actually, I got a question the other day. We were doing a presentation similar to this to some of the communities that we work with in northwestern Colorado. And it was to a group of people that aren't as involved with the federal government as a lot of communities are with ARC. I mean, I just want to give a huge shout out to ARC. You guys have done an amazing job and have an amazing presence in the region. And that's not often the case with that you don't often see that in other places, right? So one of the questions that I got back from somebody was just, overwhelmed, so many options, number one. Number two, overwhelmed because of the time period. Like, you mean I have to do what in what period of time, or else the opportunity goes away, right? And the third thing, which was really interesting to me, was just confusion, right? I mean, Betty, this kind of goes to what you're saying about the IWG teams. The person could not understand what is the coordination between DOE and EPA and IWG, and we're hearing from all these people and we kind of can't sort it out, right? So anyway, that was just something new. I hadn't heard that. Anyway, so I just wanted to flag that. I think is something for us to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that the whole genesis of us collaborating with ARC and entering into that interagency agreement was twofold. Two federal agencies working together. And the other part of it was because of ARC's presence in those communities. We felt like we get the biggest bang for our buck. We would be able to hit the ground running with their help. And we're looking forward to collaborating on more projects with them. So, I mean, it's turned out to be a very fruitful collaboration. We're very proud of it. And we're looking for more ways to collaborate with them to really make sure that we are, getting the best understanding of what these communities need and trying to figure out the most expedient ways to get them the help that they need.
Are there any other questions for our presenters? Feel free to unmute as well.
I would have a question that I would pose to the participants here. Is there any suggestions or ideas of what you think we could be doing better that would make us more accessible so that your concerns are heard?
Everybody should say give more money.
Yeah, this is Angie Rosser with West Virginia Rivers, and I mean, this is amazing to hear about. I'm hearing about some of this for the first time, like these resources available. So, and I try to keep on top of things, so that makes me think. And we're doing, an IRA, Inflation Reduction Act roadshow right now, and speaking to a lot of local town councils who are hearing about all this money, but I tell this story a lot. In Boone County, Cole community, the same person that writes the grants also drives the ambulance. So it's this is exactly sort of the life raft we need to know we're not alone and that there's help out there. You know, people say, oh, we'll send people to a grant writing training. There's no time for that. Like, we just literally need people here helping with the project planning, helping with the grant writing, and hopefully in the process building capacity for the administration part, which I think I'm hearing is the idea here. So that's good. I guess what's on my mind is how to get the word out more widely about this, and how we might get an audience of local electeds sort of in a room together talking about with more access to y'all.
I want to put a plug into for the Thriving Communities technical assistance centers that are going to be opening up. EPA, Department of Transportation, and I think there's another agency, and I can't remember off the top of my head, are going to be standing up these organizations. EPA's organizations, we have 17 across the country that were just selected through a process, RFA process. We hope to have them stand up by the middle of the summer. These are going to be resource centers that you all could call to talk to them about what your issues are, what your needs are, and their job is going to be to help guide you in the right direction, to help you write the grants, to steer you to the right agencies, that sort of thing. So please take a look for that. I'm sure we're going to be doing more press releases. We've done one right after the selections were made, but I'm sure there'll be more. So keep an eye open for that. I don't know if Heidi or Bettina, if ARC has anything similar to that.
Well, I'll just add that Angie, your local electeds that you have in mind sound like they might be a good fit for the Ready Local Governments program when it is launched, which should be happening later on this year. So I would just follow ARC if you're not following ARC already to make sure you hear about that. The other thing is that I know it can be confusing, all these different like offerings and programs, like and sometimes you might not hear about it, which, you know, says to us that we, you know, might need to expand who we're reaching out to. But I think one like central place that you can follow, which lists a bunch of these types of opportunities at once, is the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities email list / their social media. It's called Energy Communities on Facebook and on Twitter. I think they're on Twitter. And so they're kind of like a clearinghouse of all of these different opportunities. They really focus on, they have so much like available about like, here's a funding opportunity, like the ones that Betty just mentioned, the Thriving Communities, technical assistance centers. I mean, all of those different things from the different agencies, they have all that stuff in one place. So it would be less overwhelming. So once again, that's the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities to follow.
And Angie, if you actually haven't already, I actually really loved your quote. I wrote it down about the grant /ambulance driver, grant writer /ambulance driver. So if you haven't already, I mean, Boone County might be a really, really great contender for our Coal Communities Get Ready Challenge. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do, right? Like grants up to $150,000, deep technical assistance, and then connection with a cohort of your peers around the country to build that capacity, right? In a way that you can do it hopefully faster. So I just encourage you to check that out. And for anybody on the call, if you could help us spread the word, if you know anybody that would be interested in our resources, again, I put the links in the chat. Please just feel free to send them out to anyone. You can find us pretty easily.
I just put a link in the chat for the IWG Clearinghouse. It's pretty comprehensive.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This was such a great presentation. We are going to conclude now with our closing video from EPA Region 3 Administrator Adam Ortiz and his closing statement. So just stand by for that.